Today is our inaugural Career Day panels. I'm so excited to start off this series with our development and fundraising friends. I created this space at orchestracareers.com in an effort to spread awareness of all the careers available with orchestras off the stage. And I thought the best way to do that is to bring my friends, the pros, into a space with people who want to know more. And so that is what today is. Today is the first one of a series of 4. And so many of you already maybe are familiar with the work of orchestras, but I was thinking about how to introduce our friends today. And I can't do that without talking about, obviously, the work of an orchestra, right? And the number one thing we do is put on concerts. And that's kind of the natural thing to think about with the work of an orchestra. I work in operations. I'm the VP of operations at the Nashville Symphony, and I get to work with my artistic team. We put together concerts, but with the musicians of the orchestra. But that's not enough if you don't have an audience, right? So then we've got whole teams of people that generate audiences. They sell the tickets, they get the word out about the concerts. Those are our friends in marketing and communications. And man, I have learned a lot about that work in the last years. And the thing is, though, if you know anything about orchestras and nonprofit organizations, ticket sales only cover 40, or maybe in our case in Nashville, 60% of your whole entire revenue that you need to run the organization. So what do you do with the other 40 to 60% of revenue that you need? Well, you gotta find it. And our friends today are going to talk all about what that means. What does their work look like? How did they learn to do it? And what are the challenges, and also maybe just the straight up rewards of development and fundraising?
Like Sonia said, my name is Giuliano Kornberg. I'm the Chief Revenue and Development Officer for the Sacramento Philharmonic and Opera. This is like the 5th or 6th thing that we've done together, Sonia, I think, at this point. So it's always fun to have these panel discussions and things of this nature. Again, really appreciate everyone being here. Josh, Anwar, and Maribeth are amazing fundraising professionals, and I would say probably 3 of the best in the business. So I think we're all very lucky to have them here. So your official title is Chief Revenue and Advancement Officer, correct?
Correct. Yes, I'm the head of marketing and development. So it's a combined role, overseeing both marketing communications and the fundraising activities for the organization.
Very cool. Because one of the first questions I was going to ask is, well, you've got this really interesting kind of, unfamiliar title. Like, what exactly does that mean? But I think we'd also be very curious to hear about just your path and how you got to that current position where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, one, I just want to say thank you for inviting me and for having me and being joined by some people that I know and some people that I don't know. So I like new friends. So happy to be here and happy to meet all of you. So I started my career in the arts actually I started volunteering for a dance company. My background is I was a professional dancer for a long time until I realized that I was competing for jobs with people that were half my age. And I said, it might be time to hang up these dancing shoes. So I started volunteering my time and really thought that this could now be a career for me. My first official job working in the arts was working in the box office. I had a part-time patron services assistant job. So that was answering the phones, processing orders, taking donations as they were coming in, returning phone calls, printing tickets, all of that kind of fun box office stuff that people don't really think of as being a real way to advance your career. But one of the good things about it is that you really kind of learn many facets of the organization, and you learn what makes people tick. You're that first person that people will call when they have an issue, but also the first person that people will call when they love something too. So you really start to hone your skills and really end up in a place where you can understand why people come to the arts, why they participate in our art forms, why they feel like it's important to continue to support. So that was really inspiring for me. And I realized that this is something that I could do for the rest of my life. And I kept moving up, and then also moving across the country. This is the 3rd city that I've lived in and as an adult. Lived in Atlanta for 7 or so years, and I was working with the Atlanta Ballet. Then I moved out to California and started working with the LA Phil in Hollywood Bowl, which was a really amazing experience. It was my first time really working for an orchestra. I had been tangentially related in many capacities, but it was really about that time that I realized what an orchestra can be and what it means to a community. So I kind of got bit by the orchestra bug, and I feel like I'm hooked now. So from there, I just continued to increase my level of responsibility, both in LA and then also coming here to Omaha, where I am now. I started off as the Vice President of Marketing and Communications with the organization in 2019. And in 2020, that's when I became the Chief Revenue and Advancement Officer. So we went through a strategic planning process to really think about what kind of roles and responsibilities do we need to help move the organization forward. And for me, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very passionate about why people come and support the arts, why they think that it's important to have that role in people's lives, and really just do whatever I can do to help advance that. I did play instruments growing up, but I was a terrible musician. So I always have had an affinity for being in an orchestra. So I can relate, but not like some of my peers and colleagues who are much better musicians than I am. So I can speak the language, and it's really helpful for me to be able to not be a primary driver of the art form, but to really be a supporter. And that's what makes me have a relationship with our donors, with our ticket buyers, with all of our supporters, our corporate and foundations, because it's like what I'm trying to do is say, this is why this work is important. This is why we can enrich the community. This is why it's important for you to either invest your time, your talent, or your treasure into this organization and what we can do for each other. So that's how I got here in the quick, 2 minutes, 2-minute speech, but it's been a fantastic ride, and it's a really fun thing to do.
Terrific. Thank you. I see Maribeth next. So I think we'll go very similar question to you, Maribeth. Would love to hear about your current work as, Senior Director of Development. Again, what does the senior part mean? And again, your path to how you got here.
So Senior Director of Development at the Nashville Symphony. I'm the number 2 Chief Development Officer, and we're on the larger end of the spectrum in terms of orchestra size, budget size. And we raise about between 8 and 9 million in our annual fund each year. I came, so in my role essentially is overseeing all individual giving for the symphony, which is about 65-70% of that target. And it's obviously a very collaborative effort amongst many, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later, kind of the current state. Our current state is very different than what it typically is. So the last year has been pretty harrowing, I know, for so many of us. But my pathway, I am a vocalist and grew up kind of in the theater space all through high school and college. And I found my path toward arts admin a little sooner than Anwar. And I'd like to say that it was very premeditated and very much about soul searching and thinking what I could bring to the world. But it was very much about having a pretty awesome, well-rounded musical theater program in college that had a great facility. And so there were a lot of student opportunities in the facility. And so I started to work with our artistic director, and she was also our fundraiser. Back then I didn't even know what fundraising was. I mean, didn't know what fundraising was. So I went to school for theater and communications, and because I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Couldn't imagine not being on the stage, couldn't imagine, not pursuing that. And like many of us, you get to the collegiate level and you get knocked down a peg and you realize that, gosh, I'm really passionate about this, but maybe I can do things off the stage to support those who might have an ounce or two more professional talent than myself. So in school, I started to work for the artistic director in the stage management program in the company as a company manager. And so just did a lot of, but kind of all still in the theatrical space. But that's where I wrote my first Ohio state grant, went on my first sponsorship pitches with that woman I ran a summer theater program at the collegiate level. From a business standpoint, I did some company management for a couple of international trips for small performing groups and got to perform a little bit myself. So that was kind of the world that I lived in. I did play the bassoon as well, but I stopped my freshman year of college because I kind of had to go one path or the other. And I realize now that I was never going to be very great at the bassoon. So it was probably wise that I put that down, and I still sing, but that's it. So so I had an appreciation, of course, for instrumental music, but I really didn't have a background in the repertoire of classical music, except potentially from, ballet works, from Tchaikovsky and things like that. But so right out of school, and I want to talk about how important I think relationships are and networking. We'll get into all of that, I'm sure, with some future questions. I started, just had natural, strong relationships on campus from being part of this program and that kind of thing. Didn't really think I had a relationship with the president of the college. Okay. This is a pretty small school up in Ohio. However, when it came to upon graduation and starting to apply for jobs, I knew I needed to stay in the arts. And selfishly, again, as a I don't know, what was I, 21 or 21 at that point, I wanted to stay in Ohio because my boyfriend had another job, had one more year of school. Right. So fortunately, 21 years later, he's my husband and we have 2 kids and it's a great family. So it was a good move to stay in Ohio. But we had dreams of going to New York or Boston or, big city, but reality set in and I needed to stay near Toledo, Ohio. And my school was about 45 minutes south of there. And so I canvassed, any kind of arts opportunity. And that included the Toledo Symphony, included, arts commissions and theaters, all kinds of stuff in this relatively smaller network town. Well, lo and behold, Dr. Freed he was the namesake of the Performing Arts Center. He was on the board of the Toledo Symphony. And so my resume crossed paths there, crossed the executive director's desk there. And she called him and said, "What do you know about this girl?" And he may or may not have known exactly who I was, but he asked the theater director and she gave a recommendation and I got the job. And it was pretty similar to Anwar. It was in customer service, started out in the box office. And I was there for 7 years. And it was the perfect training ground because it was, it's a small, about $6 million orchestra. I think they raise about 1.5 or 2 million a year. So I started out in the box office, customer service rep, was able to do PR, was able to do library stuff, was able to work with guest artist liaison stuff, driving people around and, reservations and all that kind of stuff. And then moved into corporate work. And my mentor there said, I think you should start to come on calls with me. And I think you should. And she just kind of saw something, that kind of go-getter, do what you got to do, scrappiness, I think. And just kind of brought me along and said, I think you should try this kind of role. And so business development was kind of where I ended up there. I was pretty burned out after 7 years in a small organization. So when we decided to move to Nashville, it was actually because of my husband's career. And I actually said, I think I might be done with orchestras for a while. It must be like this everywhere. It must be just exhausting and, all consuming, and it must never stop. And, all this, thought I would take a break. Turns out at that point, this was 2008, there was an opening for a sponsorship coordinator at the Nashville Symphony, which was basically what I was doing, corporate development. So it turns out I took a 3-week break. That's about it. And stepped into the role here. And 12 years later, my path moved from, corporate development, including grants management, and then they asked me in 2012 to take over the whole campaign. And then from there, we've kind of, split off and developed some things, and our team has grown. So that is hopefully not too long of a story, but those are my stepping stones on my path to the Nashville Symphony.
Josh, I think we're going to go to you now. Again, very similar question. Would love to hear about what you're doing. I know that, you're at the Philly Pops right now, but you worked previously at the Philly Chamber Orchestra, right? So you've kind of toggled between a couple different art forms in the classical music world. So we'd love to hear kind of what you're up to and your path to get there.
For me, it was very interesting. I always knew that arts administration existed. My first voice teacher was on the board of the symphony in my hometown. And so I knew that it existed. She talked to me a lot about it. And I was like, I sort of want to do that. But when I was going to college, I decided that I would go and get my degree in voice because I felt that at any point I could just go work in arts administration, but I couldn't just up and go start singing if I didn't have a degree in singing. I was like, it isn't that easy. Like you have to know how to sing to go be a classical singer. You know, like you just have to, you know, like it wasn't the same thing. So I got my degree in voice, and I knew very quickly into school that I didn't want to be a singer. Like that wasn't the life that I wanted to have. Um, and that wasn't scary to me. You know, I know for some people, if it's the only thing you've ever known, like if you want, like Maribeth said, you're like, I have to be on the stage, I have to be a performer. If at some point you decide maybe this isn't for me, that can be really scary. Because when you're in college, and if you sort of have the traditional path, like all the way through school, like, you know, you leave high school, you go straight to college, you know, like what you decide to do is to some degree all you've ever known. It's all you've ever really been interested in, and that's why you choose it. But for me, it wasn't scary. I was like, you know, I'm very confident in this. I think this is right for me. And I was very active, um, you know, sort of on the administration side in the university while I was in school. And my voice teacher at the time, he said to me, I think you could have a really huge career in arts administration. And it took me like a few months to realize that wasn't his way of saying, dude, you are not going to be a singer. It was his way of saying, you're really good at that. And I think that you should do it, but it isn't that you're not good at this. And I needed to hear that because you become really close with your teacher and you want to make them proud. And so you want to do the thing that they are training you to do. And that's sort of like, that's the path you're on. So when he said that to me, it was in this weird way, sort of like, go and do that other thing. It's totally okay. You can do it. So when I graduated school, I did a few odd jobs for smaller organizations, sort of like one-off things. And I was working in a restaurant. And like Giuliano said, I worked at the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. And one night after a concert, the music director and the conductor came for dinner. And there was this man who worked at the restaurant. He knew what I wanted to do, and he went up to them. If I was white, I would have been red because I was so embarrassed. But he went up to them and he said, this is Josh. He's great. He wants to work with you all. He wants to do what you do, but he's not going to come over here and say it. And you should hire him. And that was the best thing he could have ever done because he was right. First of all, I would never have gone over to them and said that. But, you know, it was huge. And they said to me, give us your email, send us your resume. And if something comes available, we'll reach out to you. That never happened. They never reached out to me. And one day I saw that there was a job available and I wrote to them and I said, I hope that you remember me. Here's my resume. I don't know if I'm really right for this, but I'd love to work with you all to some degree. And they brought me in for an interview. And when I met with the conductor, I could see the resume of one of the other candidates. And I knew this guy and he had a whole lot of experience. And I thought, I am not getting this job because if I'm against that guy, I know he's going to get it. He did get it. And the executive director called me and he said, I know we brought you in for one thing, but there's a different job available. And I wondered if you were interested. I'll send you the description. If you're interested, great. If you're not, that's also fine. But I'd love to have you here, which like never happens, by the way. So I was like, okay, great. Yes. Hadn't seen the job description, but I just said yes to it. And he said, no, I think you should look at it. And I think you should see if you're interested. And it was for the donor and patron relations manager. And I took the job and I went to work there, and the place had a whole lot of issues. And because of that, I learned a whole lot really, really quickly. And there was a guy there who was on his way out. He was the manager of marketing and he'd been there for a few years. And he said to me, you're not going to make much money here, but this is going to be for you like a master's degree. You're going to learn 10,000 things and you're going to leave here with more experience than you ever could have had because it's on the job experience. You know, like I wasn't an intern, I wasn't a co-op, like these were my responsibilities. And he was right. And I learned so much. And so when I left there and I came to the Pops, which was a much bigger organization, probably 4 times the size, I had a lot of experience And I was really, really grateful for that. I learned a whole lot. And I will say, one of the things I dealt with on my way out of the chamber orchestra was they were like, "Are you sure that you want to go there and work on that kind of music?" And I was like, why would I not? You know, like this, one of the things I love about working at the Pops, and I think it sort of, flies under the radar, goes forgotten. It's American popular music. Like it is ours. Like this is the music that we have created in this country. When we put on Aretha Franklin on my wall, Aretha is ours. Like she was born here, she was raised here, she makes music in our language. The stuff that Mozart writes, that opera and those symphonies, I love that stuff. Absolutely. I studied it in college, but that is not ours first. This music, jazz, musical theater, that is ours. And so one of the things that I work on here is that, like that message, like this is an American heritage that we have to preserve because it is so uniquely ours. Everybody all across the world wants to see it. You see all the time on TV, American artists in foreign countries, they're singing all the words. They don't know what the words mean. They're just singing them because they love the music. And so in my role here as the director of development, one of the things I'm trying to do is create for the organization an understanding in the patrons, in the donors, in the corporate sponsors, in the foundation givers, that what we do here is just as important as what the Philadelphia Orchestra does, as what Opera Philadelphia does, as what the Philadelphia Ballet does, because to some degree they see what we do as being very commercial. It's easy. You can, like we can hold up one of our brochures and walk down to the corner and say, "Hey, do you want to see a Star Wars show? Do you want to see a Beatles show, Aretha Franklin, Sinatra?" Somebody's going to be like, "Absolutely." But if you do the same thing and say, "Do you want to come see the Pines of Rome?" They're going to be like, "I don't even know what the Pines of Rome is. No, I don't want to see the Pines of Rome." So that I understand, but I see us as not commercial. I see us as accessible because for some people, we might be the only orchestra they ever see. And I want them to know that what we do has a rich heritage on both sides. On the classical side, because these are all classically trained musicians who are coming together to make this music. And on the American popular music side, because this is ours and we have to keep it alive for years and years and years to come. So currently, we raise here about $2.5 million, $2.25 million. It depends on the year. But in about 10 years' time, the organization has gone from raising 200,000 to that 2.25 million. So it's been really, really fast growth. And the organization is constantly trying to catch up with itself on the resource side, but also in terms of having people understand the breadth and the depth of what we do. So that's in addition to raising money, part of my mission is to do a better job, with my friends in marketing and communications at communicating what we at the Pops do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I think your passion for just the art form and just the organization certainly shines through. And it seems like you've really kind of internalized the mission and like why the Philly Pops exists. And I have to think that when you're in conversations with donors and patrons in the community, like that really helps you be more successful at your role, which again is raising resources for the Philly Pops so that you guys can do all the great work that you do. So that's terrific. And it also sounds like, kind of looking back to the beginning of your career, just asking for help, right? Or, having people who kind of invested in you enough or were invested in you enough to pull you aside and say, "Don't do this, do this," or "This may stink, but continue to do it." And even if you didn't like that person, right, having someone like that, I think, can be really valuable, whether it's in an official mentor role or just someone who cares about you well enough to say, "Listen, this is probably the best move for you." And it sounds like kind of everybody was lucky enough to have that. And I do think that early career, or I guess being a student, pre-career, early career, mid-career, whatever career, I think having that mentor figure or mentor figures, right, who again can give you kind of the honest and perhaps tough feedback, I think is very important. So thank you very much for sharing. I think hearing, from all three of you guys, Josh, Anwar, and Maribeth, regardless of what you do, like the relationship aspect seems to be kind of the most important thing. Again, whether it's relationships with donors or in your case, Anwar, kind of everybody who contributes to the organization, with colleagues, with the community, with mentors. And obviously right now is such a crazy time with COVID and everything being different. So I'm sure the relationship aspect and keeping those relationships going in a way that works for everybody is probably one of the most important things that everyone's thought about during this time. But because it is such a crazy, wild time, I'd love to hear from, like, I know Maribeth, you brought it up, so we'll start with you. I'd love to hear just kind of like what you're thinking about in terms of doing your job and talking to people and raising funds and trying to continue those relationships in this time when going to get a cup of coffee with someone can be a little difficult.
So relationships are just focusing on all different aspects of relationships has been what I like to think is my life's work here in the last 12 years. In particular, the dynamic between musicians and staff, number one. And then how that kind of parlayed into bringing musicians more into the forefront with our patrons. So when I came here 12 years ago, we, as the underling in the development department, but coming from a small institution that had a very, very tight-knit relationship amongst musicians and staff and patrons and board leadership and all of that, came into a very amicable working relationship amongst everyone, one that had very good policies in place. We had musicians on every committee, there's musicians on the board, there's good representation everywhere, communication was strong, all of that was fine. But I'll be if the first entire year, every single donor event we did, every single one would be a post-concert reception featuring the guest soloist and the guest conductor, and musicians weren't invited. Our musicians weren't there. And when I brought it up to our leaders at the time, who were all gone, everybody's gone. There's like 5 of us, I think, who are still here that have been here that whole time. It was not for lack of desire on anybody's part. It was more like, well, I don't think, from a development person, I don't think that they really want to be there. And so therefore we didn't ask. And musicians probably were just like, okay, it's time to go home. Nobody asked me to do anything else, And so slowly, and I just didn't think that, so it wasn't anybody didn't want that to happen. It just was kind of just nobody really took it a step further. We were doing parties after almost every single classical weekend and never a musician in sight. And so the moment we started, what I really felt strongly about it was that it started with just our personal relationships from development people to musicians as people. And so I just started to try to break down those barriers. And then as I was able to move kind of up in the department, I would say insisted, but encouraged that to be the environment with my colleagues. And one little step at a time, we started to break down barriers and started with those personal relationships. We started to change the flavor of how our events went, how our benefits were structured, what kind of things we were trying to create to bring those people together. And this is obviously clearly how I'm talking. This is the stuff that brings me so much joy. I'm not sure how much talent it takes to ask someone for a gift, but I do think it takes a lot of talent to think and creativity and passion to think about all the different types of supporters you have and all the different types of musicians you have, and trying to figure out how to create spaces like what Sonia is trying to do with her whole program here, trying to create these spaces for them to get to know each other. And so we've started a governing members program, which is kind of this mid-level donor and subscriber who they get all these kind of behind the scenes access points to our musicians. We have a major donor program. We have, which a lot of orchestras have, this kind of adopted musician program. We've established some things like that. And we had all these things that we've built over the last decade. What it means right now is that people are sticking with us because we've invested in these relationships. They're invested in us. And at a time when we can't be together, they're riding the wave. They're giving. Now that we have musicians back part-time and we're able to work with them again here, everything I'm doing every single thing I'm doing is focusing on trying to pair people back up with musicians again. So we're started a virtual lunch series. We're starting a happy hour series. We're doing panel discussions, around different topics. We're all the virtual benefits that I've redesigned because we can't do anything together yet. Really, I have a lot of passion for that.
Yeah, no, it's terrific. Well, and I think what you said at the beginning also, like the act of actually asking for money, maybe not that in the grand scheme of things, super hard. And also, like people say, what asking for money is what 5 or 10% of the overall scope of work, because the rest of the time is doing some of the things that you've done, cultivating good rapport between different parts of the organization, obviously getting to know the community. And I think it's really important, because I think when people think of, fundraising and relationship community building, it's, well, who do you know out there, right? Who do you know external? But it sounds like you guys have been really smart and methodical about saying, you know what, there's some work to be done between the rapport, between the staff and the musicians, or even like different staff members, and kind of getting everything shored up in-house, which then propels you to have more success actually speaking with your donors and your community. So that's really, I think it's really smart how you guys have thought about it. I think we'll go to you next, Anwar, because again, you're in the kind of interesting, unique position where, you're thinking about rapport and relationships with everyone from like the first time single ticket buyer to the person who's giving you a 7-figure gift or leaving an 8-figure bequest, so you have a wide spectrum of people that are kind of under your purview. So I'd love to hear and think about how you think about the relationships with all those different constituency groups that really comprise kind of the entire spectrum of how you guys make money.
Yeah, indeed. So I see my role primarily as a facilitator, right? It's my job to make sure that anyone feels connected to what it is that we're doing. So whether it is, you want to come out and you want to see Star Wars, or you want to come and you want to bring your child to a family concert, or you feel like as president and CEO of a Fortune 500 company that a community of our size needs to have, a top-notch orchestra. Right. So my job is to be able to tell that story, so that way, whatever it is that you feel like you need to get out of us, that we are able to provide that for you. So whether it is I had a lot of conversations this week around specifically trying to get the orchestra back into people's lives. We've been fortunate enough to actually have been performing since October of last year. So I feel very fortunate in that case. But many of our traditional patrons said, you know what, this thing isn't for me right now. I'm going to take a break and I will see you in the fall of 2021. So what freaked me out about that, I said, well, if you end up in a space where you are just easily able to say, I'm not coming to concerts, I'm not engaging, I'm not doing anything, then what do you replace that space that we held in your heart for so long with? So for us, it was very much like doing some of the same things that Maribeth has been talking about. It's like, okay, well, we're gonna have lunch together, or we're gonna have a happy hour, or we're gonna do something that we've never done before, and just say, okay, well, musicians, I need you to send a personal message, right? So I'm asking you to record a video, and it's very personal, because we like to believe that there's a fourth wall on the stage, but there really isn't, right? So the musicians, when they're on stage, are like, oh yeah, I know him. I've seen him at concerts since 1976. I'm like, well, that's a long time. I wasn't even alive in 1976. So that's wonderful, right? But then they can tell these stories like, I remember the first time we played this piece and you were in the audience and you came up to me afterwards and you said, this is how this changed your life, right? So just in those moments right there, you end up with starting to connect the dots for people. And the way that we do that, and on the marketing side, we tend to talk about these funnels, right? So you have your big audience up here, and then you kind of narrow it down until you get to the perfect people that are just opting in and saying, yes, I want to come to this concert. But the conversations that we're having now is more about cycles with people. And we're really starting to build like lifetime relationships, right? So even if we say, okay, well, when you were a kid, did you participate in our education and community engagement programs, right? So then you do that from preschool all the way up through high school, maybe college. And then we say, okay, well, what's the next step that we want you to take? We want you to buy a student ticket, right? So then you get accustomed to coming to concerts. All right. And then after that, we want to say, all right, the next thing for you is like join the Young Professionals Club, which we don't have one, but we're trying to build one because we know that that's a step that was missing. And then as you become a professional and you say, you might have your first job or your second job. And as you start to build up on your career path and your ladder, now you have some disposable income, a ticket buyer, or as a, this is your first time, or whatever it might be, right? So we're starting to cultivate those relationships. And then as it moves along, then we come into those advisory councils and, your governing members or whatever it might be. And then maybe from that group, we funnel down and we might find somebody that is wonderful on the board, right? And then you just say, okay, well, then we're cultivating that long-term, it might be the bequest, or it might be we go to them and we say, look, you participated in our education and community engagement programs as a child, or you brought your kid to the family concerts. Would you help me underwrite some of these, because these programs are so important, right? So then you start to step into those 5, 6, 7-figure gifts. And we've been having a lot of success with trying to think about people in a more holistic way. So it's not about just what you're doing right now with us, it's what has your lifetime look like with us. And really thinking about, even if you are in a space where this is your first time and you're 60 years old, that's okay too, right? Because now you're coming to us at a different point in your life. You're not going to be able to come to concerts forever. So we're thinking about, how do we make sure that you're here, and when you can't physically be here, that we're going to be able to get something to you. 20, 30 years ago, that was making sure that I can get you a CD, right? Or I can get you a recording, so that way you can listen to it at home, or that we could be on the radio. Now is saying we could do something digitally, so you can actually still see the orchestra. And one of the questions that came up is, well, if you could watch an orchestra on your TV or on your computer, why would you choose to watch the Omaha Symphony? And we say, because it's your hometown, right? These are the musicians that you know and love. This is the venue that you see, when you're driving back and forth to work every day. This is the music that you know and love. So we try to really partner with local artists and really think about that more holistically. So I just see myself as a facilitator to make sure that we have a relationship, and I can eventually just fade into the background, right? So doing a lot of what Maribeth was talking about is, I'm connecting you to the musicians, or I'm connecting you to the education and community engagement. I'm connecting you as a corporate donor into making sure that our community stays vibrant, and really being able to tell that story. So for me, like I said, it's all about just me being a facilitator, and I can just get out of the way. And that means that I've done my job.
Well, and it sounds like also, when you bring up the word lifetime, that's obviously a long time, right? So I think you're smart to kind of build some of these, things and programs and mechanisms to ensure that, again, from someone who's a student or like an early professional through like the entire scope of their kind of individual life journey, that there's some sort of appropriate connection between that person and the organization. So, and of course, I'm sure the kind of day-to-day work has to get done, but it does sound like on top of that, you thought a lot about, okay, where really, as we think about these different constituency groups, where really can we get them, and what's the smartest way to do that? To finish off with you, this is really more probably for the students on the call / the students who will at some point watch this video. If there was one thing that you think, or you wish you would have known kind of as you were starting your career, or even now, one thing that you're seeing where it's like, yeah, kind of currently I should really think about this and maybe adjust my path, what would that thing be? What would be like that one kernel of, wisdom or a nugget of advice that would be like, yeah, that changed my life, or, thinking about that will change my life?
We talk about relationships, and that really annoying thing where people say it's all about who you know, is really true. And it's so frustrating, because there's always a point in your life where you feel like you don't really know anyone. And you're like, how do I get to know people? I don't know anybody, but they tell me I need to know people. It really is. And I would say, as a young person, do your best, like Maribeth did, do your best to form relationships early on with people who show some sort of interest in you, because they'll always have your back. And that even applies once you get into the workplace. If you happen to work in fundraising, there are corporate sponsors and grant makers who I feel like they have my back, like they want to give to the pops, and they want to support our mission. They want to support me and my work. And it really is all about relationships. So I think the thing that I would say, to people who are starting out, or who are in college, or just leaving college, start building relationships as soon as possible, because that will be how you get really, really far. It'll be your relationships, because you can get really far if everybody likes you. Sometimes the person who gets the job is not the most qualified person, but they're the person who's liked the most, who has the best relationships, who had someone call on their behalf, write a letter on their behalf, pick up the phone, all those sorts of things. So start building your relationships, really pour into them, and people will pour into you on the other side.
One central theme is it's all about relationships, right? And not even so much who you know, just like, again, relationships with colleagues, the community, mentors. I mean, the power of really tight, really strong relationships for career growth, for personal growth, for any type of growth. Sounds like that's really important. So thank you for sharing. Just a few minutes left. We're a bit of a small group also. So if anybody has any questions for our wonderful panelists, I think you can just go ahead and shout it out. It could be about their path. It could be about, specific nuts and bolts of fundraising. If anyone has any questions, feel free just to unmute and go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I have a question, but first, thank you so much to the panelists and Sonia for putting this together. This has been awesome and totally informative. My question is, if you had to highlight one personal trait or attribute that you need to be successful in a career of development, what would that be?
We were just talking about this before the call began. It's the gift of gab. I'm telling you, like, it will get you so far to be able to have a conversation with anyone about anything. And to that degree, make sure you know a little bit about a lot. That's what I say about myself all the time. I know a little bit about a lot, because you never know who you're going to be in a room with. You never know what you're going to need to be able to talk about. Know a little bit about sports, politics, food, wine, like any number of things, because that making someone feel comfortable there could be money on the other side of that.
On a similar note to what Josh mentioned is, as much as being able to know a little bit about everything, being a really good listener, you want to feel like you do a lot less talking than you do listening. So I would say over listen to everything, and also keep really good notes, because I do a really good job at just saying, having a great conversation, and then you go off to the next thing and the next thing, and then you're like, well, wait, what did we talk about? So having a good notebook, even if it's just like, someone will mention, oh, I had a great bottle of wine last night. Oh, well, what was it? And then you just write it down. And then whenever you're getting ready to go into that next meeting, or when you need to get a gift for someone or whatever it might be, just those little tiny tidbits is just a good thing to just keep, like, small notes, because they will drop hints on things that they really like. So yeah, listen and take notes.
I have 2 bottles of our largest benefactress's favorite wine in my fridge in my office, just in case she ever is there and we don't have it, just as a little tidbit.
Right. Well, but because that person, right? Kind of what she likes and what she responds to, and that's important. I think for me also, I mean, there have been times where, like, I'll be it could be like a 30-second phone call or a minute phone call, and it's just like a bad call. I mean, like, I'm not talking very well. The donor isn't understanding what's happening, and, like, those stink. So I think for me, one of the things that I've learned is just, like, if you have those bad experiences, it just kind of happens, right? And you try to shake it off. You kind of steel yourself and say, you know what, the next one's going to be better. And kind of like what Maribeth was saying, like that fearlessness to make that extra call or make that initial outreach or whatever it is, even if, like, the most previous one was just terrible. I think that resiliency is a really valuable skill to have, particularly being a fundraiser where you could hear no a lot. You have to just kind of go on to the next thing and, say, you know what, it's going to be okay.
So when you all were first getting into development and fundraising and you didn't quite have all the experience there, what kind of things did you put on your resume or say in your interviews or on your cover letters to sort of make yourself fit the bill?
I would say make sure on your resume, there should be numbers always on your resume. If you were responsible for ticketing a 1,000 seat house, put that on your resume. If you were responsible for acknowledging $1 million in gifts, put that on your resume. Sometimes you don't have to have been the one to raise the money, but just sort of doing the nuts and bolts things in development, that can get you your next job, I promise you, because you can never get too high up to stop doing admin work. Let me tell you, you can never. So having those skills and being able to, show them on your resume, I think is incredibly important. So qualitative things and quantitative things, I think, are really great to have on your resume.
You want to think about transferable skills, right? Every position in development is not necessarily going out and making the ask, right? You have operations people who process gifts. You have events people who, like to throw parties. You have people that are just researchers, right? So depending on the size of the organization, there will be many different types of jobs. So you really want to think about, the way that you structure the resume as well. Really thinking about like, okay, well, I maybe don't have the development titles or the fundraising titles to get there, but do I have the transferable skill sets? And then you highlight those much more than you would just say, I was the, donor operations coordinator, or I was a special events manager, right? So even if you were a server, right? What do you do? You help people, you have conversations, you keep track of things as they're moving through. You're great at communications. Like there's all of these like really transferable skills that will make you a good fundraiser. So part of that will also come in your cover letter as well. So even if you don't have all of the skills or all of the titles, really articulate well in the cover letter. Not, don't make it, 3, 4, or 5 pages long, but really highlight some of the things that you say, this is why I'm passionate about this work. This is why I would be a great professional in this role. And these are the reasons why you should hire me, right? That's the role of what a cover letter does. So then that way, by the time it gets to the resume, then you've already started to paint the picture for them. Because more often than not, when people are reading through these things, they're like, okay, skim, 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 skim. All right, no. So really tell your own story, be your biggest advocate. And that will, it's not the magic bullet that's going to get you there, but at least someone will be paying attention, someone who is open-minded, someone who says, I'm looking for this type of person and not this job. You will be able to get there.
I just want to give a big thank you to our panelists today for our inaugural career day. I hope that you all learned something new about the possibility of a career in development. I just love working with my development friends, and I learned so much from them. So if you enjoyed this career day and you think a friend would enjoy the next one, we're going to do marketing and communications. Monica's going to join us March 6th. And we're going to do this all about marketing and communications, getting those tickets sold, get those butts and seats, and getting the word out about what great work our orchestras are doing. So tell a friend, share the post when you see it, and that will help us get the word out about these important sessions.